Well, good evening, and we have a very fine question. Our question is, can the UK survive without changing the Constitution? Excuse me. I think we might ask, can the UK survive changing the Constitution? It's just as good a question. Whether it is changing it or not changing it that is the greater threat is, I think, quite an open question. Now, one thing one might ask, it's a simple thing, is what is constitutional change in the UK? We have a constitutional doctrine called the sovereignty of Parliament. It means that anything can be changed by a simple majority following the process through Parliament. The rules of the game can be changed, the constitution can be changed. There is no requirement, as in many other countries with written constitutions, for a two-thirds majority or whatever for constitutional changes. There's really no hard and fast distinction about which changes are constitutional changes. So one might think that means it's not very important. I differ. I think it is fundamentally important. And I say that as somebody who comes from the part of the UK that has already been through being dismembered during the last century. I'm from Northern Ireland. Of course, my father was born an Irishman in 1912. By the time I was born, he was from Northern Ireland. If you read an account of the constitutional lack of focus of the Liberal governments from Gladstone to Asquith, I think you can see how being blasé about constitutional issues can have fatal effects. And the recent book by Ronan Fanning on how that union, the union between Britain and Ireland, was lost, is pretty revealing. So what challenges do we face? I picked out 4 groups. First of all, the obvious one, the nations and the regions. At present, we have a ragged devolution settlement, different in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. And it's being exacerbated as we stand here by a lot of piecemeal tinkering in Parliament. England, we all know, is highly centralised and much larger. In the last year, we've had a lot of unconnected bits of change without any coherent view of what needs to be retained and what needs to be rebuilt if we're to survive as the United Kingdom. I have a feeling that those who are driving this piecemeal change are really not aware that constitutional changes are more than little bits of legislative tidying, which for electoral reasons one might push. An illusion, of course, created by the sovereignty of Parliament doctrine. They see constitutional issues as electoral pawns. This afternoon there was a debate on the recall of MPs, which illustrated this profound issue being treated in an unsuitably trivializing way. Then, of course, there's Europe. Let's just say the EU for the moment and forget about NATO, but Europe is also the European Convention on Human Rights, or is it? The Conservative Party thought that perhaps what they called a British Bill of Rights would be a good idea. As bills of rights go, the European Convention is a very good one. Sir David Maxwell Fyfe, the UK prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, later Lord Chancellor, Lord Kilmuir, a common lawyer, drafted this really rather admirable document. Well, what's the alternative? Well, some other Bill of Rights. What would be in it? Would it be the same things again? Well, maybe. Some people say the same rights, it's the rights that are okay, it's the Strasbourg court that we don't like. But of course, from the point of view of an executive, the courts, the higher courts, are always disobliging. And as a matter of fact, the UK loses very few cases at Strasbourg, and we are, and should I think be proud of being, a highly human rights respecting society. But the thing that is barely discussed is that all 3 devolution settlements, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, are tied to the Human Rights Act of 1998 and thereby to the European Convention on Rights. So you can see what you have to unpick if you're to withdraw from the European Convention. I shudder to think of the Northern Ireland peace process, which is pretty wobbly, being subjected to that particular piece of tinkering. Let me turn to the difference between decentralisation and devolution, since Peter trailed, I'd say a little about that. Decentralisation, it seems to me, is a wider and less contentious thing. It can take the form, it has taken the form in many places, of delegating tasks and holding people to account for delegating the task. Essentially managerial. You delegate the task and here's the budget and we'll hold you to account for doing it, and there shouldn't be any postcode lotteries. We all know the mantra. Devolution is different. It's about delegating. It's not about delegating, it's about devolving decisions. And a great deal of the current debate simply fails to distinguish devolution from decentralization. It's naive about what will and won't be needed. There are examples that need a lot of thought. English laws, English votes for English laws for English votes. Well, it's a problem that we've lived with. England is so much the largest part of the Union that it doesn't actually threaten England. First past the post, if you read Vernon Bogdanor's excellent new pamphlet on the crisis of the Constitution for the Constitution Society, he argues that one of the things that cannot now survive is first past the post, because it is in the post, the days when political parties have faded so much, it is not delivering government by consent. And what powers do we wish to see go to the courts? So what if the Union is to survive? I think what we would have to look for is something that is workable, I take that term very seriously, fair, that achieves a coherent allocation of powers and duties, that preserves equality of citizenship. For example, the right of appeal to the Supreme Court, a single passport, the currency, borders, defence, immigration, whatever. Greater visibility on financial flows. I think subsidies from one part of the country to another, absolutely fine, but they need to be for clear reasons, not by a formula that creates automatic privilege for some groups or some regions. And at present, you only have to look at how the Barnett formula works to realize that it is Scotland that is getting a lot of money, more than per head than England, a lot more than Wales, and only Northern Ireland, which does have particular security issues, gets more than Scotland. So government, I think, needs not to be monopolized or preferentially controlled by any nation or region. My conclusion is that we need, and we need urgently, a proper constitutional convention with due seriousness, care, and lack of populism to look at these issues. Citizens need to be able to see fairness, not just who won. Thank you.